That's a head. This head. So, want to know how we did? I have the results right here. Read them and weep. Welcome back to Skelly's Garage for part 4 of the Project M54 rebuild series. If you're curious about parts 1, 2, and 3, well, you can see them over here. Pause for a second, then continue. Last week, I took this block to a machinist who read it with a gauge to tell me that the cylinders are, well, they look okay. But that's not enough! I need the data! We're about to find out together what these measurements are. So I've made this sheet of real measurements for the cylinder bores and for the pistons, and we're just gonna do some quick measurements, and then we're gonna continue on to the actual point of today's video, which is the cylinder head, standing right there. You need 2 tools to do this. You need an outside micrometer, like this one, and you need a bore dial gauge. I shall explain the process. So, according to the internet, 84 millimeters is 3.307 inches. That means that I need to make this outside micrometer, which is set to inches, 3.307 inches wide. Right now it's set to 4, so I need to subtract 693 thousandths. Yes. That's 3.307 inches right there. So now that we have the width of the outside micrometer, what we need to take is this guy and make it long enough to fit just in there. Now we have a bore micrometer that should tell us when we are at 84 millimeters exactly. And I have brought the most sacred of tools, a pen and paper, to write things down, as it were. So, let's do cylinder 1. 3 points off. The middle is 5 points off. At the bottom, we should be bang on. Okay, we're 1 point off at the bottom. All right, cylinder 4. 1.5 points off. At the middle, we have 2.5. The bottom is...
I'll spare you from the whole measuring process, but as a whole, the measurements showed that, as expected, the cylinder bores had expanded in the lateral plane more than the longitudinal plane.
I'm realizing that I wrote these values as negative, but actually they're positives. Now let's do a quick measure of the pistons and we'll be on our way. This is the piston head for an M54B30 engine, much like the one that I've got here in the garage. That is actually in fact because it is from the one that's here in the garage. This is piston number 1. All of the measurements that you see here for the cylinder bores are extremely useful information. However, it's incomplete without also measuring the pistons. It's necessary to measure the pistons to understand what kind of clearance you're going to get in your engine. Too much, and you'll have blow-by. Too little, and that's not really a concern with a used engine, you'll blow it up. So let's see. Now the piston head from the M54B30 is meant to measure 83.995 millimeters across, and it's measured 8 millimeters up from the bottom of the piston skirt. Just make a mark on the piston here, where 8 millimeters is off the skirt, and another one on this side. Miraculously, 8 millimeters is actually the height that the micrometer sits. That's 3.65. Same as above, 3.3065. Have a look at these numbers. I know I had to re-measure this one because I wrote it down wrong, and then I wanted to make sure that I was right. All of these pistons are well within specification. A couple of things that I need to explain to you. If you go on BMW's technical documentation, it will tell you that the clearance between the piston and the cylinder walls is between 0.01 and 0.04 millimeters. That is simply not something that you should expect to see when you actually take an engine apart that has been used. Which is also why BMW doesn't specify an ovality or a conicity for a used engine. Instead, what they specify is a maximum wear tolerance. BMW states that the engine is completely fine up to and including 0.15 millimeters of tolerance. With these numbers that I have written on this sheet, I can't tell you that. But with the power of movie magic, I will tell you about that right now.
After taking down the measurements you saw on the paper, I transferred them into a spreadsheet to compare the actual measured values to the nominal diameter of 84 millimeters. While this block would certainly not pass a new engine inspection, it was still doing quite well and had only mild deformation. What was more interesting, however, was when I brought in the measurements for the pistons, I was able to tell that my maximum cylinder clearance was around 0.065 millimeters, which is extremely within the specified BMW maximum of 0.15 millimeters. That means, empirically, we have now proven that this set of cylinders and their matched pistons are good. Now, let's get on with the cylinder head, in a weak rendition of the style of my favorite Australian internetist.
That's a head. This head weighs about as much as the block does, which is just, it's a little funny, but our job is to take off these bearing strips without losing any of these lifters, because they are all very special, they are all unique, and they all must be retrieved. So I've got a bunch of these magnets, which hopefully will do the trick. Again, BMW has special tools. I don't have special tools. It worked for some guy on the internet. We'll see if it works for me. Here's that, here's that. The bearing strip's not actually like bolted in or anything, it's just kind of press fit on, so we need to just rock back and forth until we have enough space to put something under the bearing strip and lift it out. You just have to be careful, you can't be an animal. If these magnets will have worked, then once I take these bearing strips out, the lifters will come with it. If it hasn't, this is gonna make a lot of noise. I'm nervous. Oh, it's working! I will be the first to admit that I didn't really expect that to work. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. The reason we did that is because unless we replace this tray, which is called the bearing strip, and each one of these lifters, which is not cheap, they have worn together. They need to go back into the exact spots that they came out of. I was given this nice box from a woman who bought peaches. So here's our peach truck. Now this next part is really cool. This is what we're going to use to remove the valve springs and the valves themselves. It's a pretty cool tool. I found a man who was willing to print some 3D printed stuff for me. This design was made by somebody called E46NV. Let me show you how it works. We used the nuts that held on the cam bearing caps, and we just slowly rotate them onto the tool, and we just work them down. You can see the valves are sort of starting to peek out. What you can do is you can just literally push them back in. Now that we've done that, you'll see that there are these keepers here. So now our job is to take them out and put them away. See, this one's already split, so it's gonna make our life a little bit easier. I don't know where my small magnet is. It would make my life a lot easier. So now let's take this off, and we're gonna get our valve springs out. Now, if you take all of this off just now, it's gonna shoot into your face. So you don't wanna do that. Instead, what we take off is just this one at the top, and we take off this washer, and then we spin it back on until it's taut. And then we do the same thing with the one on the other side. Now we can remove these. You wanna release these evenly. I think that's the tension done. Now we can remove these two. Take off the tool, and here are our valve springs. Look at that! And we can take out the valves if we want to. Very good. Now, let's do this 6 more times.
And so I went on removing the rest of the valve springs and valves, and once again found myself in front of a mandatory photo op, what with all the Valvetrain taken apart. It was by now getting a bit late in the day, and I decided that I'd wrap up the evening with my new favorite bedtime routine, cleaning years of caked up oil and grime from my M54B30.
So, it's the next day. Look at this. It's pretty clean. It's the same story on the other side. I'm actually pretty happy with it. I still want to try to hit these with something just to make that clean, but I'll take care of that later. We still have some time before it goes into the car. Now, why am I sitting here next to the head? Elevated like so, on these convenient broken pieces of Ikea MDF. In front of us we have the unenviable task of finding out whether this head is straight. The maximum tolerance for the head is 0.05 millimeters. That means that if I'm at any point able to insert this feeler gauge, which has a width of 0.06 millimeters, we might have a problem. And that means that I should probably take it to a machine shop, but let's not get overly technical about it and just do it. This 6-cylinder engine, there are many different ways that you can measure, and you should measure all of them. We're gonna do that. You should have a block of wood for something like this. Theoretically, you know, a lot of people will just hold the straight edge to the engine head and they'll call that good. But, you know, if you're holding something there, that could lead to some inaccuracies. We're gonna use the block of wood and rest the ruler against it. So, here's our feeler gauge. Can you stick it in? That's good. So far, so good. Honestly, I'm kind of surprised. Sorry, you're not going to see this part. This head is good. It's straight. Well, it's straight enough. How did I wind up with this engine? The next thing to do is the last measurement for this cylinder head before I say, it's good. Have a look at this. You see those gold things there? Those are the valve guides. And over time, as the valves go in and out of the engine, sometimes they wear out. They become oval or they just have too much play. The point is, we need to check that. To accomplish this task, we need wood, preferably upcycled Ikea furniture that you broke. We lay the flat edge against the valve seat. We take our valve. We put it in, so it needs to be about here. See if there's any play. I mean, there's the tiniest amount there, so we're going to find out what it is. First, we push the valve all the way to the left and see how far it can push the wood away. Then we take our feeler gauge, start with 1/4 millimeter. That fits. Let's double it. That does not fit. That's actually all I need to know. This is intake valve number 3, passed. Now I just have to do this 23 more times. So, want to know how we did? I have the results right here on a piece of paper. Read them and weep. That's it. I can now absolutely definitively say that this head is good. It doesn't need to be decked. The tolerances are perfectly in order. The valve guides check out. Honestly, what more could you ask for? This is a dream come true. Now let me explain to you why I have been measuring everything. It's because I expected there to be something. I expected there to be some reason why this engine was taken out and left in a yard for a year. I can't find one. I don't know why. Maybe it had bad rings. Maybe. The exhaust valves do have a pretty generous coating of carbon. Maybe that's what it is. But from a perspective of things that I can and already have fixed, I mean, I'm not going to let a couple of piston rings stop me at this point. That's what I have all these big boxes of parts for. So I think let's end this episode on the fantastic note that this is. The head is absolutely, unquestionably, empirically proven to be good. And I have further good news. Remember last week when I was installing the crankshaft and then I realized that I did it completely incorrectly? Well, the people at Bimmer World sent me some new ones, which I paid for with my own money. Still. But I decided to buy through them just because it doesn't take a lot to make me feel special, but they did. So if you're wondering what the plan is for next week and when we're finally going to get this engine in the car, I'm about to answer that. Next week is going to be a big week. We're obviously going to put in the main bearing bolts. We're also going to check connecting rod clearance, swap the rod bearings, put in new piston rings, clean the valves, clean the block. Yeah, we'll start putting the engine is actually going to start going together. I'm not going to promise you that we're going to have a fully built engine by the end of next week's episode, but we might. We probably won't, but we might. With that said, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you're enjoying this series as much as I am. I'm learning a lot of new things, and hopefully you have learned something too. A special thanks as always to my Patreon subscribers who help make this channel possible. Anyway, with that being said, my name is Sam, that's the Gray Lady, this is a good head, and this is Skelly's Garage. We'll see you next week.